I'll start by introducing myself and how I got involved in this subject issue movement of socially responsible procurements and contracting. It actually, when we started out, we called it socially responsible investing, the acronym SRI, which is a lot of how it's known around in progressive circles, but we've modified it to socially responsible procurements and contracting, SRP and C, because we found out early on that in the city of Rochester, the city doesn't have any investments, so we couldn't approach it from that angle. We had to approach it from what the city does do, which all cities do, which is purchase things and establish contracts for services with various corporate entities. So March of this year, March the 12th, we had our first meeting with groups from the progressive community. And Alex White was at our meeting, and then we had a second meeting on May 30th, and Dave Adius came, and so we now have, there's probably 12 groups or so who are, joining with us, or in the process of joining with us, or have joined with us. To name a few, Metro Justice has officially gotten on board. ROCLA recently has voted to kind of join with us in an official way. Rock Citizen is on board with us. The Social Democrats, Democratic Socialists of America are on board with us. Mothers Out Front came to our last meeting. United Christian Leadership Ministry is maybe not, we're not sure, but they did come to our first meeting and they're interested. House of Mercy, St. Joe's, and maybe leaving somebody out, I hope not. But there's a good kind of number of groups, and we're looking to increase the size. So let me get to the substance of this. What makes this different from other kind of similar initiatives historically is that this is meant, in the past, cities around the country have taken stands on issues on an ad hoc basis. As an issue would come up, and finally the climate would have moved from ignoring the problem to at least addressing the problem or admitting that there was a problem, progressive cities might take a stand. So in the 80s, the apartheid era, the city of Rochester, for example, adopted the Sullivan Principles, which set certain standards for the city in terms of not doing business with governments that, or with corporate entities that supported the apartheid regime. Also in the 80s was the first sanctuary movement. In the 80s, we called ourselves a city of sanctuaries, and that had to do with illegal immigrants who were refugees from Guatemala, death squads. And but it was issue by issue. Later in the 90s, the McBride principles were adopted, pertaining to Northern Ireland. What we are now asking, and this is what's different about this, is that the city adopt certain screens or principles that would govern purchases and contracting, such that there would be established a do not patronize list based on violations of certain principles. And that cities, or corporations, sorry, would be placed on the do not patronize list as a statement that we as a city will not subsidize or encourage immoral behaviors in corporations, and that it sends a message. We don't think that it necessarily will undo a corporation. For example, Caterpillar is a corporation that is in violation of, we have 7 screens, and I think is in serious violation of 6 of them. So Caterpillar's a bad actor, and we don't think that if the city of Rochester will not use a contractor that's using Caterpillar equipment, that it's going to undo Caterpillar. But it takes a stand, a moral stand, and it kind of raises the level of discourse in the country in a certain way. The more cities that get on board with this kind of thing, the more it sends a message to the federal level and to the corporate world that times are changing. So that's the idea. So the big difference is that this would become an ongoing, day in, day out statement of commitment to moral principles by the city government. How it would work is that there would be a committee established, perhaps called the Socially Responsible Procurements and Contracting Committee, or perhaps called the Corporate Accountability Board, in kind of harmony with the Police Accountability Board. But whatever it would be called, this would be a group partly appointed by us and partly by the city council to review corporations and to come up with lists of corporations that are not behaving as they should be. So so back to the origins of this, the Israel-Palestine focus. I emphasize this to everybody that I talk to who's not in Jewish Voice for Peace or Christians Witnessing for Palestine, that this is what brings us to it. But people don't have to agree with us, don't have to be in support of what we're passionate about if people don't feel that way. We recognize not everybody does. Until 4 years ago, I didn't feel the way I do now. I was moving there, but I didn't feel this way. So it's a much broader thing now. It's meant to benefit and to address every progressive agenda in our community. So that will range from environmental concerns to human rights concerns, to health concerns. So, standards governing socially responsible municipal practices. The basis for decisions regarding what corporations are considered for placement on a do not patronize list are a group of criteria or screens, sometimes referred to as the ESG screens, in which E stands for environmental safety/danger, S stands for social justice, and G stands for corporate governance. In practice, the following 7 ethical standards are addressed. Environmental concerns, including fossil fuels and climate change. Contributions to human rights abuses. Health concerns, including weapons development and production. Unfair labor practices. Excessive monopoly dominance. Corrupt ethical governance, and excessive tax avoidance. So those are the 7 screens that were developed by the people in Portland and Seattle. And I think they pretty well cover the waterfront in terms of progressive concerns. So we are asking every group that is joining with us to think hard about what corporate entities you guys consider to be bad guys that should be addressed in some fashion. We have a few in terms of the Israel-Palestine thing. People have already done some of the work for us, and so for quite a while, Hewlett-Packard has been on the list because of software that they developed and implemented that helps the Israeli army dominate and control Palestinians. Software that operates checkpoints and military prisons. Hewlett-Packard is on our list. Caterpillar is high on the list. Let's see. There's a security company called G4S, which helped the Israeli army develop techniques for subduing and dominating Palestinians individually and in crowds. They are here in Rochester. They are employed at the bus terminal, right? So that's something that we want to bring up. But there are so many corporations and sectors that could be addressed, whether it's fossil fuels, whether it's tobacco, whether it's weapons manufacturers. The whole gun situation is something that we could address through the committee in City Council. So I will, somewhere here, I have our resolution. Has everybody seen or not? You have?
I have.
Have not. Okay. Well, I'll read through it, and I probably have a few copies here, but I can send it to, well, Dave, you probably have a copy.
I do,
Okay.
it's written all over.
Okay, but, I can send it, you could distribute it, or I can send it to the whole mailing, email list.
Well, let me ask a quick question. Is the resolution like public now?
Well, it's public in the sense that I think everybody who wants to know what we're doing and wants to join in with us needs to know kind of what it says. It's still in some flux. In fact, from our last meeting on May 30th, there were suggestions made, which we're incorporating.
Okay.
There was a concern voiced that, because you'll hear that the wording we have is that the composition of the committee will be established by the city council and the mayor. And somebody, it was Robbie Mangler, for those who know Robbie, said, I hope I'm not speaking out of line here, but isn't that kind of giving too much power to people who, have a long history of abusing it? Shouldn't we be proposing at least half, or if not a little more than half of the members? And that makes a lot of sense. So it's not how it was done in Portland. In Portland, they did have the city council propose the membership, but and it seemed to work out well. But it's maybe a little naive of us to think that the city council is going to come up with progressive people who are actually trying to find corporations that are bad actors, and that they won't choose people who don't want to find anything wrong with anything and just want to say that everything's fine the way it is. So we're going to change what we're asking for.
This is what I'll do.
So I'll read this, and it'll give you some of the flavor of what kind of how we're presenting this and thinking about it ourselves. So, resolution affirming Rochester as a socially responsible purchaser and contractor. Whereas the city of Rochester, hereinafter the city, has a long and treasured history of being at the forefront of the ongoing human rights struggle to protect and advance human rights, including our being home to the great Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony, and including our prominent role in the Underground Railroad. Whereas the city adopted the Sullivan Principles in ordinance such and such, declaring the city of Rochester's commitment to racial equality and its opposition to apartheid in South Africa. And whereas that resolution, 85-133, prohibits investments in financial institutions or instruments dealing with South Africa. And whereas that resolution further requires financial institutions wishing to do business with the city of Rochester to file a certificate with the city clerk stating that the institution has a policy of hiring and promoting employees and officers without regard to race, color, creed, religious affiliation, sex, or national origin. And whereas the city adopted the McBride Principles in an, quote, ordinance declaring the city's opposition to religious discrimination in Northern Ireland, close quote. And whereas the city adopted a resolution on May 27, 1986, which declared the city of Rochester to be a city of sanctuaries, with particular regard to refugees from El Salvador and Guatemala, including a commitment to, quote, maintain and further human rights, close quote, for the citizens of Rochester and, quote, all who come within its borders, close quote. And whereas the city, 31 years later, February 21st, 2017, renewed and updated that commitment, Resolution 2017-5, quote, affirming that Rochester is a sanctuary city committed to equal rights for all, close quote. And whereas many people of the city of Rochester recognize the moral responsibility of communities to take continual political steps toward ensuring that full human rights are obtained for all people. And whereas the council finds that it is in the public interest for Rochester to adopt socially responsible contracting/purchasing policies. And whereas, consistent with its formally espoused values, the city's responsibilities to its residents include social and ethical obligations to take steps publicly to avoid contracting with, purchasing from, or investing in corporations whose products and or practices consistently violate the human rights, civil rights, or labor rights of members of the global community, or disregard the collective right of humanity to a healthy and sustainable environment by creating products that endanger individual and collective health, including the irresponsible production and sale of weapons, or egregiously contradict efforts to create a prosperous, educated, healthy, and equitable society, i.e., which demonstrates unethical corporate behavior. Therefore, be it resolved, so now we get down to the action part, that the City Council commits itself to the creation of a process to review existing and potential purchases and contracts, as well as possible corporate investments for either continued inclusion on the city's list of acceptable products for purchase, contractual partners for services, or corporate securities for investments, or for placement on a do not buy or patronize list in accordance with the values of our city as referenced in this resolution. And be it further resolved that in order to conduct such an ongoing evaluation, the City Council commits itself to the establishment of a socially responsible procurement and contracting, SRP&C, committee to consist of, and this is the old language, which we're going to change now, soon, to consist of 6 volunteer members, 5 of whom will be selected by the at-large city councilors and 1 by the mayor. SRP&C committee members should be selected based upon their interest in the principles underlying SRP&C, expertise in any of the relevant areas, e.g. environmental and or public health, social justice, human rights, ethical corporate governance, etc., and or the requisite research skills to undertake the investigations necessary to make objective assessments of current and prospective commercial partners of our city. Based on their research, they would recommend to the City Council those entities that should be considered for placement on a do not buy or patronize list. The City Council commits itself to the establishment of an operational SRP&C committee by no later than 6 months from the adoption of this resolution. So that's the kind of nuts and bolts of it. We are going to change it to a committee of 9 with 5 members coming from us and 4 from the City Council and Mayor. So that we have a majority in it. We have to go into this, I think, knowing that the committee can only be advisory to the City Council. We can't, we're not elected. The committee will not be elected members. So, but I think if there's a vigorous debate as to why certain entities should be on a do not patronize list, and that those get presented as recommendations, even if it's a 5-4 vote, to the City Council will be under some pressure to take them seriously, and we'll be far ahead than where we are now. And I think it'll move the city in a better direction. We'll join with others who are trying to do this kind of thing. In our national conference calls, there are people now, this was not the case very long ago, but there's a group in Michigan, a group in Durham, North Carolina. New Orleans had a resolution similar to this. Cambridge, Massachusetts. Several groups on the West Coast, in Berkeley, and John, you might want to say something about the national.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch, a lot of them focused on the West Coast. Santa Fe has something going, and they're all in different levels of research and trying to figure out what they want to do for at the municipal level. So yeah, there's quite a few across the country, although it seems to be just now coming into the East Coast.
Everybody should be aware that as these city movements gain momentum, that there's a backlash that should be anticipated. The powers that be don't like this. Particularly the Jewish, the pro-Israeli Jewish community, the Jewish Federation, all over the country has, reacted rapidly to these movements. Sometimes they've been so overboard in their hostility that they've shot themselves in the foot. And city council members whom they threatened and intimidated and didn't take kindly to that and basically said, who do you think you are? In other cities, it hasn't gone that way. In New Orleans, for example, in January of this year, 2018, in early January, the city council passed a resolution similar to this. It wasn't as detailed. In fact, it was mild. It really didn't call for anything but a kind of philosophical statement that the city would say that they're not in favor of doing business with corporations that behave badly. They didn't even mention Israel and Palestine in their resolution, but the Jewish Federation got wind of it, and they did not have a very broad-based coalition in New Orleans. It mostly was Jewish Voice for Peace and Palestinian Solidarity something. And they called the city council members with such force and venom that 3 weeks later, the council met and rescinded their vote, re-voted, and took it back. Something similar has happened in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is very disturbing. I mean, Cambridge we think of as being more progressive than New Orleans, but that's going to happen here, and I don't think it'll be just the Jewish Federation in Rochester. I think corporate entities, because when we talk about tax avoidance, there are local corporations here that are big-time exploiters of tax avoidance. Some of the real estate developers here that are cut sweetheart deals by the city, are not going to like this. They're going to smell, that their days could be numbered if this comes into being. So there's going to be pushback, and I think everybody ought to be prepared for that. But I think that in Rochester, we're already broader based than I think any other city that I've had contact with in our progressive coalition. And I think that the stronger and broader we are, the more difficult it's going to be for anybody to push back. The Jewish Federation, they can shout all they want, but this is not a group that is only about Israel and Palestine. And this is going to be a group that's about everything. I think we have a good chance to be successful. We're all feeling our way. Nobody really knows exactly how to go about it. We don't have a blueprint. John and I and others who kind of started this are really open to everybody's suggestion about how to approach the city, what's the best way, but I do think that we have a good chance to be successful in terms of getting a resolution passed. We'll see if that's accurate. And I think that it will move the city forward. And even if we don't get the resolution, I think we will have made a lot of progress in terms of having a joining of the progressive forces in Rochester. I think we'll be in better shape, whatever happens. But I'm optimistic about it. I don't think it's going to be easy. I don't pretend to know exactly how to go about it. But we certainly welcome the Green Party to be part of this and partners with us and us partners with you guys. And I think one of the things that's happened for me in this is that I've realized that although I have a responsibility, I feel, as a Jewish person to address the Israel-Palestine situation, I feel much broader about it now because I see the racism in Israel towards Palestinians to be no different from racism here in Rochester, or anywhere else. And so I really am enjoying and stimulated by interacting with other progressive groups with different focuses, and so I'm looking forward to going forward together to try and bring this to reality.
Well, fellow Greens in the room, anybody, just kind of a consensus thing? Does anybody have a problem with us officially signing on?
Oh, it's good.
I think you can throw us on there, David.
It's unanimous.
Yeah, it's-
Just out of
I really-
curiosity, your opinion on the broader scope of the Israeli-Palestinian issue, because it becomes the sort of thing where the more you hear about it over years and years, you start to get a certain, well, at least if you get a certain sense of hopelessness. Like this is a resolution, like a two-state solution or something, seems to be as out of reach as China leaving Tibet or America returning large swaths of real estate to the Native Americans. You start to
Right.
feel like, if you're me, that you've been hearing this your whole life, the die has been cast, Israel's got an agenda from one administration to another that's just going to be, push this out for as long as possible until it's a fait accompli. And I'm just curious what you think of that attitude.
Yeah. Well, I think Israel, the die is cast, yes, and Israel is on a self-destruction course that is, I said I'm a psychiatrist, that is psychotic in nature, that is delusional, that somehow by oppressing this other group of people hard enough, long enough, that they'll eventually give up and go away and let Israel have what it wants, which is the entire territory. This is all about land, and it has nothing to do with religion or religious conflict or anything like that. So, but I'm optimistic in the sense that I see it as unsustainable. The tide is turning, slowly but surely, and Israel's position is increasingly untenable. There's more and more international opposition to it, abhorrence of it, and I understand, I didn't see it myself, but I heard that yesterday the General Assembly of the United Nations voted in condemnation of Israel's recent behavior in Gaza. That's a step. there are cities, international cities that have taken steps to adopt pro-BDS resolutions. Does everybody know what BDS is? Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So it's based on the anti-apartheid movement, the boycott of South Africa. So it's changing, I think, and Israel is increasingly desperate, behaving in ways that nobody except the U.S. Government can condone or support. So I do think the tide is turning. Younger Jewish people are less interested in supporting Israel in a blind fashion. People in my age group were closer to the Holocaust, and so we were more blind for longer, but it's less true today. Younger people, don't really feel the effects of the Holocaust in the same way that I did and people in my generation. So the two-state solution is dead. Israel has made that impossible. The only way that it could be revived would be for Israel to give everything back that it has stolen. So in a way, it's kind of fitting that Israel has a terrible choice from its point of view. It hangs on to all the cities that it built on occupied land, and then somehow has to share it with Palestinians who are reproducing at a higher rate. Or it has to give back the land which it took in violation of international law, and go back to the pre-67 boundaries, and let Palestine exist as a second state in the area, as was supposed to happen in the first place. But the one-state solution, which is now what's really the only thing that can happen, is Israel's answer to that is to cut up the
One
Palestinians.
state meaning Palestinians are vote as well as Israelis?
The one-state solution is what exists currently. There is only one state. It's called Israel, and Palestine doesn't really exist. There's no autonomous possibility even. The Palestinian villages are all encircled by checkpoints and highways that are for Jews only. And so they can't communicate with one another. They have to go through checkpoints to get to the next village. And they don't have anything close to equal rights. So that will have to be addressed in some fashion. Israel will have to do away with the highways, and that could be done pretty easily. Do away with the highways, do away with the checkpoints. There'll have to be some kind of international intervention for that to happen. But it's approaching some kind of tipping point in my view. So it's kind of a long answer. I'm optimistic in the long term.
One of the issues that the Green Party is involved in is public banking. So this can, you might want to consider doing a little research on the public banking system, and it would address the problem with the approved banks of doing business. If we had a public bank, then they would be responsible for making sure that they comply.
Okay. If I could ask, so besides our endorsement of the idea, what else could the Green Party contribute to the effort, especially with what you just said about the ambivalence of city council members in general?
Well, at some point, we are gonna need to ramp up an approach to city council in a persuasive manner. And
Excuse me.
I'd like to, if anybody has any connections, I think networking and connections are always good. So if people in the Green Party have a connection with any of the city councilors, that, I'd like to hear about that, and, we can utilize connections. If people have thoughts about exactly how to go about it, then, I think we all just sort of pool our wisdom and creativity and to try to come up with an idea. But, we want to do this relatively soon.
We're like the most activist political party, but we're a political party, and we try to run candidates for office. And like we did in 2013, when city council was up for, some seats were up for reelection, they're up next year. And they're the quadrants, the fours, and if we have candidates running, that this is an issue that we could speak to at community forums and on questionnaires and things like that, on our candidate websites and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And 2013, particularly for city council and in Alex's mayoral campaigns, if we don't win those elections, the candidates who do tend to take some of our ideas. So that is a way to persuade them.
Okay.
But to say, do we have any connections with them? They don't really like us that much.